Hi. Last time we took a look at 1 Corinthians chapter 8 and in verse 1 where it says, "Knowledge puffs up, but love edifies." And we looked at the context of that and what he's talking about, that when you believe you know what you have freedom to do, sometimes we insist on our own way because we believe we have the freedom from Christ to do it, and yet it's at the expense of our brethren who don't share the knowledge that we have. And sometimes we're even wrong in what we believe we have the freedom to do, as those brethren at Corinth were, when they believed that they had freedom to eat meat sacrificed to idols. Today I want to make an application, and I'm going to try to make some more applications in future lessons as well, if I'm able to continue recording these. But I want to talk today about bad language, and specifically about euphemisms. And if you don't know what that means, we'll talk about that. But when we talk about bad language, there are some people who don't believe there is such a thing. They don't believe that there is such a thing as a bad word. How can a word be bad? It's just a word. It's just part of language. How can there be anything sinful in simply saying a word? But in Ephesians chapter 5, in verses 1 through 7, this is what we read. "Therefore be imitators of God as dear children, and walk in love, as Christ also has loved us and given himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling aroma. But fornication and all uncleanness or covetousness, let it not even be named among you, as is fitting for saints. Neither filthiness, nor foolish talking, nor coarse jesting, which are not fitting, but rather giving of thanks. For this you know, that no fornicator, unclean person, nor covetous man, who is an idolater, has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Therefore do not be partakers with them." We see here that in the context of language, of speaking, he talks about foolish talking and coarse jesting. He also mentions filthiness, the idea that there are certain things that are filthy to say. There are certain words that fit into that category. It's known throughout different cultures. They all have their different words that fit this definition of being filthy. There's also the idea of being profane. When you take something that is holy, such as God, and you treat it as common, that is profaning him. That is profaning what is holy, treating something that is holy as if it is common. And people do that with the way that they use words as well. Now, I believe most Christians probably agree with this. And understand about these bad words, words that are accepted even by people who are unbelievers as being bad words that are not allowed on the radio or television, things like that. We understand that there is such a thing and that we are commanded by Christ not to use such words, not to use such language as that. But what about euphemisms? What is a euphemism? Well, according to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, they say it is the substitution of an agreeable or inoffensive expression for one that may offend or suggest something unpleasant. So it's basically a word that's used in the place of another word, one that is not considered dirty or profane, in the place of something that is, although it's not always used instead of something that's bad to say. Here's how Merriam-Webster continues explaining the how and why we use euphemisms. They say euphemisms can take different forms, but they all involve substituting a word or phrase considered to be less offensive than another. The substituted word might, for example, be viewed as a less coarse choice, as when dang or darn is used instead of damn or damned. Or it might replace a word used as insulting to a religious figure, such as the various euphemisms for God, gad, gadzooks, gosh, or Jesus, gee, jeepers, geez. A euphemism may also consist of an indirect softening phrase that is substituted for the straightforward naming of something unpalatable. Thus we hear of people being let go rather than fired, civilians killed in war described as collateral damage, or someone who has died having kicked the bucket, passed away, given up the ghost, or joined one's ancestors. And not all euphemisms are bad. Those ones that they're talking about there at the end, there's nothing wrong with using those. In fact, the Bible itself uses euphemisms. If you just think of Genesis chapter 4, verse 1, "Now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, and said, I have acquired a man from the Lord." Well, it says he knew his wife. That's what Moses wrote. He said, that's the word that he used. He knew his wife. But that's a euphemism for he had sex with his wife. Well, there's nothing wrong with him having sex with his wife. That's perfectly good for him to do. But when you hear it put in that way, it sounds a little bit harsh or shocking a little bit. And so he knew his wife is a very smooth, easy way to say it in a way that people understand what it means in the context. And there's nothing wrong with that kind of a euphemism. But that's a euphemism for something that's not bad to say in itself. It's not bad to say somebody had sex with his wife. But when you use a euphemism in place of something you shouldn't be saying in the first place, there's a difference, I believe. When you say gosh instead of God, so you say, oh my gosh, instead of saying, oh my God. Because you know, well, if I say, oh my God, I'm using God in an irreverent way or insulting way, not in a holy, respectful way. I'm using it in a profane way. So instead of saying God, I'll just say gosh. But what's the problem with that? The problem is, everybody still knows what the original word is. And you shouldn't have said it in the first place. So when you're using a euphemism in that case, you're using a word that just shouldn't have been there at all. You shouldn't be saying that expression. It's not just that you should just soften it, it's that you shouldn't say it whatsoever because it's profane. And so when you substitute another word in its place it's only there to replace that word, it's really just the same thing as if you'd said the original word. Now, many Christians will disagree about this. Many do not believe it is sinful to use euphemisms like that. They believe that they have the freedom because, well, after all, it is, it's not the same word. It's not saying damn, it's saying dang. Well, that makes me think of what Jesus says in Matthew 23, in verses 16 through 22, where he says, "Woe to you blind guides who say, whoever swears by the temple, it is nothing, but whoever swears by the gold of the temple, he is obliged to perform it. Fools and blind, for which is greater, the gold or the temple that sanctifies the gold? And whoever swears by the altar, it is nothing, but whoever swears by the gift that is on it, he is obliged to perform it. Fools and blind, for which is greater, the gift or the altar that sanctifies the gift? Therefore he who swears by the altar swears by it and by all things on it. He who swears by the temple swears by it and by him who dwells in it. And he who swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him who sits on it." There were those who believed that in taking oaths, if they just used the right word, they didn't have to keep their oath. That it was specific to the word. But he says it means the same thing. And that's true of euphemisms as well. If you use a euphemism to say something that you shouldn't be saying in the first place, it's the same thing. Euphemisms don't have the same shock value as the original word, but because they have the same meaning, they're still profane, they're still vulgar, and we need to stay away from them. But what about those of you that disagree with me? What if you say, well, it's not clearly stated, Joel. It's not there. It doesn't say we shouldn't use euphemisms, and I just disagree. I believe I have the freedom to do that. In fact, I know I have the freedom to do that. Well, maybe you're right. Maybe I misunderstand it. But think about 1 Corinthians 8 and verse 1. Knowledge puffs up, but love edifies or builds up. What will you do with your knowledge? Will you insist on using these words that you don't have to use? There's no benefit to it. Or will you say, I know it's offending my brethren when I use these words. I know it may be even offensive to people in the world because they know what these words are euphemisms for as well. So maybe it's better just to step back and not use those words at all. Love is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is very important, but we need to make sure that our actions are driven not only by knowledge, certainly not by pride in our knowledge, but by love for others, love for God, and a desire to build up our brethren and those around us, not insisting on our own way in order to tear down. I hope that's helpful. We'll look at another topic next time, Lord willing. Thank you.